Today we begin our life lesson number 2, the secular versus spiritual, the confusion and the truth. Our topic today is very controversial. This has been a dilemma for many in the Christian world. We will look at the definition of secular and spiritual. We will explore the biblical examples of our service to God and try to establish a lesson from their examples in making our conclusion about this issue. We will try to answer 3 questions today. Is doing secular work unspiritual? Do we have to separate our spiritual life from the secular? How do we address this issue from the point of view of the Bible? We will look at defining these terms. What do we mean by the secular and the spiritual? Secular is a term used when we are doing non-spiritual, non-church related activities. Secular is not connected with religious or spiritual matters. To describe anything or any activities with nothing to do with religion, it is called secular. Spiritual, however, is the term used when we are doing works relating to church activities, works which are within the approved activities of the church, and any work relating to people's thoughts and beliefs rather than to their bodies and physical surroundings. Now let us look at the examples in the Bible. You see, God made us one body, soul, and spirit. God wants us to be holy for Him. This means that all of us should be focused on God, not just the spiritual part of us, but the whole of our being. If we look back in biblical history, we can get some lessons from the life of Abraham. How did he live his life walking with God? Was his life divided into the secular and the spiritual? Abraham's life was holy unto the Lord. There was no hint that he was living 2 kinds of lives. His was one whole life pleasing God with all that he is. He was a very wealthy man. He was managing a family business. He has loads of cattle, farms, and he has many servants. He managed this daily and served God at the same time. His worship of God is not separated from his daily work. His whole life is one whole life of worship and dedication to the God he serves. So what is God's design for our lives? Our secular life should not be separated from our spiritual life.
1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do all to the glory of God.
We should not be living 2 lives. This is where the problem is. When your life is divided into the secular and the spiritual, it makes you shy away from your faith when you are among the unbelievers. We are not meant to live differently when doing secular work. Our spiritual and secular experience should merge as if one whole experience, allowing God to be part of both our secular and spiritual activities. In the eyes of God, there is no difference between the secular and the spiritual. We are meant to be whole. We do not change the moment we are outside the church environment. So we should not change the way we talk, and we should not change what we want to talk about just because our environment is ungodly. We do not conform to the secular world when we are in this setting. We do not change our color according to the environment we are in, because when we do this, we become hypocrites. Hypocrites are when we are showing a different personality or interest, and our values changes when around other people depending on who they are. To be whole is to always desire to glorify God and worship Him everywhere we are. To be whole means that you are the same person when in the church and the same person when you are outside the church. You are real and you don't pretend to be someone else. God's design is for us to be one whole, undivided heart and soul. Whatever we do, even whether we eat or drink, all these can be done for the glory of God. You are not more pleasing to God singing in the church service any more than you are doing your ordinary task or your job or even eating or drinking. We do all this for the glory of God. This means that what God looks at is not what we do, but what we are, who we are, and what we have become. Our character is not measured by the amount of good deeds we are doing, but by the state of our hearts, its motive while we are doing them. Remember the story Jesus told us about the great separation in the last days? When He divided people between the goats and the sheep, He put people on the left side and on the right side. He said to those on the left side, "Depart from me, for I never knew you." These people protested and said, "Lord, we have prophesied and worked miracles in your name and cast out demons. How can this be?" It means we can hide behind any kind of good deeds, and only God can weigh the motives of our hearts. We can profess by our works, but we cannot hide from God the true intent of our hearts. There are many professing Christians in our time. That's why this day of great separation has to happen, because at the moment we don't really know who the real Christians are. There are many who are professing to be one, but what they do is not showing what a Christian should be. And I think this dilemma is because we have tried to separate the spiritual and the secular part of our work. But this is not what God requires from us. What does God require? In Micah 6:8, God said He has showed us what is good and what God requires, and there are three: to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. If we study this one by one, we can understand that what God requires has nothing to do with being in the church all day looking holy. He is after our hearts, what it loves and what it is motivated to do. To do justice and to love justice has to do with living right and doing what is right and defending those who are experiencing injustice. We fight for other people who are victims of injustice. We should have this hatred for injustice. It's a holy anger for those who are committing injustice against another human being. To love mercy is to go out there and to feed the hungry, visit the poor, help the homeless, and provide resources to others out of your own. To love mercy is to do acts of mercy out of the purity of your heart's motive to do good. The last one is to walk humbly with God. This again is a heart that is broken before God. A heart where pride could not stay because it is broken. And the ego has been displaced. To a broken and contrite heart, to Him I will look, God said. God does not want us to be divided. Our whole being is what worships God, not just singing to Him on Sundays, but learning to worship Him every day in any situation. Worship has its origin not in singing worship songs, but in the offering of a life. If we remember Abraham and the time God tested his love for him, he was asked to offer God his only son, the son whom he loved. When he was about to walk to Mount Moriah to offer his son, in obedience to God, he told his servants, "Wait for them, and he and the son will go up to the mountain to worship God." So that was the first time the word worship was used in the Bible. So in order to really understand it, we need to see what was involved in this word worship. True worship is what Abraham did. There was no singing involved. There was no musical instrument. There was no program. but his worship was an act of obedience. So what Abraham did, obeying God and not withholding even his only son to be his offering, was true worship. He also knew his God because he confidently said that God will provide the offering. When asked by Isaac his son where was the sacrifice, he knew God has promised him a son. So either God raised Isaac from the dead or he will make a miracle. He trusted in what God has promised, and his trust can be seen in his obedience to his will. This is an extraordinary act of a man of faith.
Romans 12:1-2. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will.
To be conformed is to follow after the pattern of this secular world. What God requires is that we are transformed by the renewing of our minds and bring this transformation to the secular environment where we are. When Jesus was teaching people in the temple, he noticed they were singing praises with their lips to God, but their hearts are far away from Him. These people seem spiritual. They are in a spiritual environment, and yet their hearts are far away from God. Then we see Job, Abraham, David, Solomon, Aquila and Priscilla, Paul, and many others in the Bible pleasing God in the secular world. Job was a rich man with lots of businesses. Abraham was a nomad moving everywhere. David and Solomon were both kings. They were in the government sector. Aquila and Priscilla were both business people. And Paul was a tent maker. Nowhere can we see them separating their lives between two categories. Wherever they went, they pleased God. Paul pleased God as a tent maker. And then he preached the gospel as a tent maker. And there was no area that was more pleasing to God than the other. When you look at how God dealt with this situation, their whole life was pleasing to Him. They did not divide it as we do in our time. When we are in the church doing ministry, we are not more pleasing to God than when we are performing our jobs as teachers, nurses, or medical doctors. All these are the same act of worship to God because they are an outpouring of our lives. This is our walk with God. We don't just walk with Him on a Sunday and then we are doing our own work in the secular work the following Monday. We walk with Him while we are in our jobs, at school, on holiday, eating, drinking. We are not pleasing God only when doing church work. We are glorifying Him every day, wherever we are, and it does not make any difference whether we are in the church, at our jobs, or at home. It is our life, our being that is worshiping and pleasing God, not the activities we do or the nature of our environment. It is our person, our whole being that God requires. Thank you very much for staying until the end. I hope it answers your question about this issue. In our next series, we will talk about the two most important days of your life, the day you were born and the day you found out why. We will talk about how you can know your life's purpose. I will see you soon.